Hello, and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that is news. And how are you, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. I've been playing with my new toy, as some of the listeners may have just heard. So I've got a new amp that even does the flashy green thing when you're talking, I'm very impressed with, which also means I can send my old microphones off to some of our other podcasts that we have. So a general audio improvement across the entire TTSS brand, essentially, so that's good.
Yes, I agree. From personal experience, I can attest there's nothing better than playing with a new toy.
I was going to make a joke, and then I just couldn't. It writes itself, really.
No need.
So this week we're going to do something slightly different. We haven't got a main story as we've had before. So we're kind of going to extend the news because there's been a lot of smaller stories that are quite interesting. So we're going to start off with the polls in a reversal of our usual episode. And then we're going to walk through a few stories, maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time. If you're in your podcast app, just look at the chapters. If one of them doesn't jump out of you, feel free to skip to the next one. And that's what chapter marks are for. But I'll make sure to do a chapter mark per story, as opposed to my kind of usual broad categories that can be up to half an hour long. Our first story is from Sky News, and it's Lib Dems would win general election if it was held tomorrow. Poll. And before you say anything, Rob, I just want to say, Lib Dem surge.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase to be coming into my ears right now. No, yeah, this is exciting news, particularly if you're a Lib Demmer, that the Lib Dems are leading the national polls, or at least were for a very brief period in time, with lots of caveats, which I've got to describe. So don't get too excited. Put your Cleggmania banners away. I think that's the last time that the Lib Dems led the polling, incidentally, after the first television debate back in 2010, when we had Cleggmania, which is as lame as it sounds to people who haven't heard of it before, when everybody thought that Nick Clegg was our new saviour, and then only a year later, Nick Clegg was our new villain number one and should be pelted on every street corner with eggs. What did you think of this story when you first saw it?
So whenever you see a story like this, people tend to, as we know, overindulge on the polls, as it were, especially the tabloids and stuff. So, I mean, I wouldn't call Sky News a tabloid, but it's not the BBC, is it? I was obviously a bit cautious, and I had a bit of discussion on another Discord server I'm on with some people about it. I think, I've discussed it in several places, and if you look at it, so they may be doing very well in the polls, but there are ways of translating it into a first past the post system. And even leading in the polls can lead to, I think it was something like 67 seats in a general election because of how fast first past the post works. So it's like the problem is that vote is spread in such a way that it doesn't translate into winning a general election, which is a shame, really, because, that's why we've talked at length before about alternative voting systems and why they can be better. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's good for the Lib Dems. It's a show of public support, even if it's briefly only topping a poll, and it shows you how far we've come. If we look at our usual polls, the average polls still only put the Lib Dems at 14.8%, which is still below the Brexit Party, even though we're not sure they're going to field any MPs. And Conservatives and Labour have been massively falling. I think it's quite interesting. I don't know if I can zoom in on the last few weeks. I wish I could. Let me see if that's possible. Yeah, but as you can see, it's quite a drop. And then on the there's like a weekly chart as well, which I would endeavour to. Oh, it's not a weekly chart, but there's this other chart where the scale makes it look even worse for the major parties.
It's scary how they've just dropped like a stone in national polling, the two major parties. That graph you've given there is quite kind. What we'd usually call in the business like a Lib Dem bar graph. For those of you not in the know, a Lib Dem bar graph indicates that that usually either Labour or Conservative can't win here, and there's a big arrow to the third bar chart, which shows a tiny little bit of the bar chart that has the Conservatives there and says that you've got to vote Lib Dem if you want to keep Labour out, or you've got to vote Lib Dem if you want to keep the Conservatives out. classic local election tactic, and usually if you actually look into the figures on those bar charts, they are not proportional or accurate at all. But it's fun to talk about them nonetheless. Sorry, Tom, on with your point.
Yeah, I suppose my general point is that a single poll, and it sat there, YouGov, 29th of May 2019, Lib Dem +2. But then the 2 polls after that, Brexit +4, Brexit +6, and our most recent poll is Labour +1. So it was a bit of a spike, and that's why we like this rolling average of the polls that we tend to use, which, as I say, is on the Britain Elects website, the Westminster voting intention. And that is better because it's averaging out all those polls. So you don't... Yes, it's fun to say a story because someone won a poll, but really those polls poll different areas, they have different polling techniques, and the only thing we can really do to try and approximate anything is take an average of those polls. So I think, as we said before, polls can be quite polarising. As we've said before,
Right.
Brilliant joke from the chat there. Yeah. As we've said before, polls can be misleading, and it's why we like things like 538 that try and make predictions based on an accumulation of data and not just one data point.
Yeah, totally. The basic rules are never throw all your weight behind the outlier poll. This is probably an outlier poll. Usually allow a 2 to 3% change in the margin of what's going on. 2, always consider short-term factors. So 29th of May was right after the European elections, where Labour and Conservatives had done very, very badly. This was almost like just a couple of days after that, there was a bit of a Lib Dem surge amongst those in the left wing. Everything came together for them, essentially, and now I think you can see on that major trends bar for the Lib Dems, that support certainly hasn't spiked up again. It's kind of flatlined, almost in line with how Labour's is flatlining, to a less extent, but it's calmed down again as people figure out where that they belong on the political spectrum. The other big thing to point out is that Nigel Farage called that poll a fake poll, a new term like fake news. The reason he called it a fake poll was because the Brexit Party were lumped under other. They just asked about Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems, didn't mention the Brexit Party by name. For Nigel Farage, this is proof of a great big conspiracy against the Brexit Party. For those of us who live in the real world, it's knowledge that the Brexit Party were pretty young, and most people weren't even considering entering them into a general election scenario. It was, all about the European elections for the Brexit Party. Now they've started to take them a bit more seriously. We can see the Brexit Party is going up. When that's an answer somebody can give to a poll, people seem to be getting behind it more than expected, and it shows a general discontent with the two major parties, particularly, I would argue, the Conservative Party, who, if you look at that bar chart, the second one you've put on there, and if you go to the website yourself, you can see this, the line for the Conservatives, as it dips down at the same time the Brexit Party one, just goes right up. And even though Labour are also losing votes to the Brexit Party, they're not doing it on anywhere near the scale that the Conservative Party are at the moment.
And I think if you just look at that particular screenshot, that current snapshot of where it is now, you can see Labour lost a bit before, which was when we were talking about that fact that the Conservatives were saying fairly steady despite all of the various issues going on with Brexit. And then Labour kind of plateaus and the Conservatives just drops, and that's the rise of the Brexit Party. And then if you actually look, Labour is losing towards Lib Dems. Like, if you kind of try and map the shapes, the Lib Dem rise is a bit more meteoric than it would be implied by Labour's loss. So maybe there's some Conservatives coming across there, and possibly some Change UK, because you see Change UK starting to dip away into the low, below 3% there. So I think anyone who went from Lib Dem to Change UK is kind of starting to come back there.
Yeah, a quick note on Change UK as well. It was revealed earlier this week that 5 of the MPs who formed Change UK, so 5 out of the 11, have left the party, including Chuka, who's the biggest one, which probably shows it's one of the shortest lifespans of a political party I can think of in recent memories, and shows that sort of experiment to capture the middle ground ultimately failed, and they lost out to the Lib Dems, as you rightfully pointed out. That party is now being led by Anna Salisbury, so she's the ex-Conservative minister, which might give it less of a Lib Demi feel, or at least there's an idea that she's less likely to join the Lib Dems. Chuka may do. I think that would be the natural home for many in the party who, when questioned during the European elections, what policies do you disagree with the Lib Dems on, didn't really have an answer. So, yeah, I think Change UK will forever last as a sort of a warning to other people who think it's a great idea to set up a new political party. Even though they did it with people from across the House, their message was pro-Remain, but we're not Lib Dem, so, you know, we haven't got the history that other parties have, so we've got some of the less of that taint about them. That wasn't enough to push them over the line and become a new third party. In fact, Nigel Farage has shown the way of how you can become a third party very quickly and very successfully by doing a very, very simple message and having sort of finding your gap in British politics and exploiting it. At the same time as we thought there was this big vacuum in the centre of British politics, there was also a vacuum happening on the right, which was the "we want Brexit by any means" group. And that was growing and growing, and as the two major parties failed in their ability to deliver that, Nigel Farage was able to sweep in there and at least capture that feeling, and do so in an election that benefited him. There were very few other people with that message during the European election. Neither Labour nor the Conservatives were saying no deal now, and even though you might argue that UKIP were fighting with the Brexit Party, they were the Change UK against the Lib Dems in that situation. Always one of them was going to fall out. Political gravity had to happen to one of them, and in both cases, UKIP lost out and Change UK lost out.
And so just kind of coming around to the other point in that story, that Conservatives are now at their lowest point. If you look at that graph, that snapshot graph, that's from since July 2017, where they were below Labour, but Labour was doing really well at like 45%, which is around the general election. Just after the general election, in fact, I think. And so now Conservatives are at their lowest point in, well, over almost 2 years. And are there any other factors? I mean, obviously, we know that Brexit is a big factor, but has anything else happened in the last few weeks that might have spurred that?
Well, they're a dying government with Theresa May, who they know is going to stand down. So, I mean, that's the other big factor. Everybody is waiting for the next thing. They don't know where the Conservative Party is heading at the moment, and the direction in which it heads, I think, could influence a lot of core voters' vote, essentially. Where are they going to place it in the future? That's the big battle to come. So we will know a far clearer picture of where the Conservatives stand in the polls once they get their new leader.
And just as a note there, I don't think we're touching on it much later. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're specifically mentioning the... Sorry?
No, I was just about to say, like, May stood down. She stood down on the 7th, but it passed with almost a shrug. People knew it. The story had kind of broken, and there was no pomp and ceremony about it. She's gone. And now everybody looks on.
Yeah, the story we talked about last time about her resignation speech, saying she was going to resign, got more traction than the actual resignation itself, which kind of just happened on Friday, quite quietly. So, next headline from the Metro, Star-Spangled Banquet. Trump came to visit, if you noticed. Just a tad. I suppose it depends on how you mean noticed. I no longer work in central London, so I didn't get to enjoy seeing a giant facsimile of him on a toilet tweeting in Trafalgar Square. But I did get to see things via the medium of the internet because I was busy last week.
Yeah, the internet reacted a lot, and people reacted a lot. It was Trump's trip, and he took centre stage quite rightly. We've talked about Theresa May. She was sort of hanging on at this stage, and we already knew she was going to resign. So she was sort of like the spectre at the banquet here. It was all about Trump, what he was going to say, what he was going to say about maybe the next Conservative leader, and how other people in British politics would react to him. So I think the first big thing to say is how Trump reacted with our head of state, the Queen. Donald Trump has always been sort of known that he's always wanted to meet the Queen, holds it in quite high regard. At least he sees it as a great photo opportunity. The Queen, and so the suspicions are that she likes Trump a little less. Of course, the Queen is meant to be entirely politically neutral. But maybe one point that was sort of brought out was within her speech she did at the banquet, she promoted the idea of how important it was to keep close links with our allies, and many people saw this as a direct thread leading to Trump, please don't break up NATO, or please make sure you don't abandon us, in a sense. So you had the Queen there, you had Theresa May there. The one noticeable absence was Jeremy Corbyn, who had decided that it was better for him not to attend the banquet in a political protest, and instead he would lead a big protest march at Trafalgar Square whilst Trump was in town and deliver a speech there. Just like a quick point about this: there's a bit of debate around if it's a good thing for Corbyn to shun Trump like this. There's one school of thought that says yes, it is good. So Trump had just come out of a European election that Labour had been a bit embarrassed by, particularly but losing to the Lib Dems. I think they would have hoped to at least beat them. They always knew they were going to lose to the Brexit Party, but Labour needed to recover some of that lost ground that they'd got from Remainers, and bashing Trump is a great, easy way to get back into sort of like the liberal metropolitan voter who instantly doesn't like Trump and the message that he's delivering. Two, it shows that Corbyn has quite a consistent message. He's always had a bit of a spiky relationship with Trump, and if he was suddenly to sort of fawn over him, that might be seen as hypocritical. Corbyn's based a lot of his image on being like the steadfast defender. He puts like justice ahead of anything. Some might say that's to his detriment, that he's not a very pragmatic politician, but he does stick to his guns on what he believes in. So again, that was a good point for Corbyn in that sense. The bad point sort of comes with, how do we think Corbyn would react if he did become Prime Minister? Prime Ministers, as part of their job, have to meet with a lot of international people, and probably meet with a lot of people they don't agree with on every level. That's just part of what being an international leader is. If Corbyn shuns Trump at this stage and gets in a very bad relationship between the UK and the US, could he threaten the special relationship? Could he leave the UK abandoned in trade talks? If Britain leaves with a no deal, they might rely on American trade more than ever before. And if they have a bad relationship with Trump, that's like not a very good way to get started in that relationship. So it is a risk, for Corbyn to shun Trump like that and to go against him so much. As we know, when Trump receives criticism, he usually doesn't shy away from it. He hits back harder. We saw this. We were reminded of this again when he visited the UK. The main stories when just before he got off the plane, he had this massive tirade against Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, who's also a Labour supporter. Did he call him a loser, a big loser?
I think it was a massive loser or a big loser, something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. And these two have always had a bit of a spat between them, which shows that Trump is not one to let things slide. He just won't let that one go. He might not like Khan for allowing the big baby balloon of Trump, which made an appearance again back at Parliament Square. All of this sort of ties into the image of Corbyn, if made leader, could it be a bad foreign policy decision for him to do this in the long run? The one thing that Corbyn might say in his defence is, well, Trump gets away with it. Trump doesn't really make an effort to smooth his other leaders. He does a little, but then can say things behind their back, or almost moments after getting off the plane after they've left Europe. He'll then go on to slag off Macron or Angela Merkel back in America when he's just visited them and been very nice to their faces. So, yeah, Corbyn might say if it's good enough for Trump, it's good enough for me, but it remains to be seen how smart that play will be in the long term.
And I'd also wonder, it's different to how other people have come at Trump. So as you mentioned, Sadiq Khan, they have this long-standing kind of Twitter feud, and they've gone back and forth and made comments about each other. And similarly, with other people Trump has got annoyed at, those people have engaged with him. Is it different because Corbyn has basically just not been there? like, this is not the same as him outwardly saying to Trump via a means that Trump is actually going to check, I don't care about you. Whereas, his supporters know what he's doing, but does Trump even realise he's been slighted in that way?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I know that Corbyn hasn't directly called Trump out on Twitter, and that seems to be the way to really get Trump's back up, So I think that tactic might play into it. But again, Trump might think his best tactic for Jeremy Corbyn is ignore him. Trump might think that he's not going to be Prime Minister, so why even bother? We'll have to wait and see on that front.
And you briefly mentioned talk of trade deals post-Brexit. I don't think we touch on this later on. But, what about... So there's two things that have kind of come up very much kind of Trumpian policy via Twitter or via just, decree that then he suddenly changes his mind. But obviously there's worries about the NHS having to be on the table in some kind of trade deal. And the other thing that's, I think, got discussed at length earlier in the year and maybe has subsided a bit is this idea of having to lower our food standards to accept US imports. Because, for example, they have this thing with chlorinated chicken where you go... Oh, sorry, not chlorinated chicken. I think it's antibiotics in chicken that where you go over there and you see signs on Subway saying, oh, there's no antibiotics in our chicken, which is a bit strange if you've not experienced it before, because we are fortunate enough to have all these nice EU rules that keep our food nice and safe. So do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just think those NHS things were really important. It made him refusing to take it off the table and then sort of taking it off the table again in a Piers Morgan interview was interesting. I think it shows the way that Trump conducts politics. Trump seems to say everything to contradict himself, and then nobody can accuse him of contradicting himself afterwards because he can point to either statement and say that he supports it. So it's a bizarre way of conducting politics, but it's the way that Trump does it. It showed almost at heart Trump is, and we've known this, Trump is a businessman. He doesn't want to take anything off the table, even though in politics you have to. There are certain red lines. Trump doesn't like that. For Trump, everything's for sale. And that made some people quite scared, and people sort of saying that if no deal is a possibility and we have to go to the USA, we're not quite sure how much of a reliable trade partner they'll be for protecting our politics and the way we do things, particularly the NHS. The antibiotics in chicken and stuff, that's also about trade deals as well. I think there was a good Dispatches show on Channel 4 recently that sort of went undercover and showed basically how horrible this chicken can be. It's another one of those red flags for a no-deal Brexit as well. If we have to lower our standards, if our relationship with the US has to become closer because we're abandoning our closest trading partner, then it certainly comes at a cost. And any leader who's in charge will have to balance the trading power of the UK against the values that it's held or the protections that it's had under the EU. And it'll be really interesting to see what the potential next leader of this country, coming from the batch of Tory election candidates, how they will deal with Trump and how they'll deal with the USA in this way going forward.
So our next headline in headline Slowfire is Gove Cocaine Confession, Gove Drug Hypocrite, which are two separate headlines for Daily Mail. I back Boris from The Sun, and that 39 billion is ours from The Times.
Yeah, so this is the Tory leadership contest, and I mean, maybe the best one to link on from the conversation we've just had is that Trump comment in The Sun, I back Boris, which shows that it may be a hint that if Trump was going to do business with anybody, he would prefer it to be with Boris Johnson, who he sees as the front runner and who is still seen by many as the clear favourite in the Conservative leadership competition that's got quite silly recently, I feel. It should. Yeah,
it's a bit weird. So I think maybe we should mention that we discussed 16 possible candidates 2 episodes ago, and it's now down to 10. So do you want me to just read out the list of 10 that we have from that tweet earlier?
Yes, please.
So the 10 are the Right Honourable Michael Gove MP, the Right Honourable Matt Hancock MP, the Right Honourable Mark Harper MP, the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt MP, the Right Honourable Sajid Javid MP, the Right Honourable Boris Johnson MP, the Right Honourable Andrea Leadsom MP, the Right Honourable Esther McVeigh MP, the Right Honourable Dominic Raab MP, and the Right Honourable Rory Stewart, Order of the British Empire MP.
They're all on drugs.
Yeah. Like, I think that's probably the best way to summarise what the news has been like. Here are these people who are vying to be leader of the country, supposed to be, strong and stable. Let's steal one of May's old slogans, that's the kind of image they want to convey. And suddenly they're all talking about how they've done drugs to be like one of the people, as if Gove or Boris could be one of the people.
Yeah, I think the main reason why they're all saying they're on drugs is nobody wants to be the Wheatfield loser, okay? When Theresa May was asked that question and he went running through a wheat field, all the Tories were going, I've done much naughtier stuff than that. In the 90s, it was sex scandals. Now, it's they've smoked, they've snorted, they've done everything. They're all high, and it's kind of brilliant and insane at the same time.
Yeah, it's like, it's just so strange, like Gove being like, I've done some cocaine, which is particularly weird when, as was pointed out earlier in the week, when he was Education Secretary, he passed several bits of legislation that were about, checking teachers to see if they had any drugs. And they're like, well, so it's okay for you to be on drugs when you're making laws, but it's not okay for the people you're making laws for to be on drugs. It's kind of a bit hypocritical, and I think there's been various kind of discussions around that this week.
Yeah, so the article I wanted to bring up was one from Stephen Bush, who writes for the New Statesman, and in this Twitter line he just says, what all these I took drugs confessions reveal is the difference between recreational usage and life-ruining addiction, which is a combination of social support networks, affluence and genetics, none of which are best dealt with by law enforcement. Essentially saying that it's mad that these Conservative candidates all can say, I've done drugs, while at the same time pursuing quite a hardline anti-drug policy that is entirely based on locking people up rather than looking at other causes of drug addiction and how you can help people who get into that mess. So I think that's the more serious side of this story that's come out. Like we say, Gove seems to be quite badly hit by this. Cocaine is obviously seen as more of an extreme drug than marijuana, and could even lead to him being banned from travelling to the United States because he confessed doing so. Maybe the biggest light, or maybe the bigger political problem behind it, was that when he did all these drugs 20 years ago, just days or maybe even hours afterwards, he wrote a big piece for a newspaper essentially explaining why drugs were so bad and why we should lock up everybody who does cocaine, which led to the second headline from the Daily Mail, Gove, drug hypocrite. So all of that tied together makes it for a very confusing situation. Gove just appears to have tried to have outdone everyone with his drug story. Like, hold my pint, guys. I did this many drugs. Now I'm the coolest. And yeah, as usual, he's missed the mark quite severely. So
typical Gove. Let me do it, David. I can do it. We're just going to keep, every time Gove ends up in the news, we're going to refer you back to that comic because it's hilarious.
It's the best. It sums him up entirely. So yeah, so that's the weird drug stuff, which is like a good side story. Oh, so it just reminded me of the other tweet that I saw. This might be one for UK listeners only, but do you remember Richard Bacon?
Yes. Famous Blue Peter, the disgraced former Blue Peter presenter, which is at least better than being disgraced former Defence Secretary.
Yes. He was fired from Blue Peter because he was found to be doing cocaine whilst he was, not whilst on set or anything, but while he was in the employment of the BBC as a Blue Peter presenter. Blue Peter presenters are meant to be seen as like a very Enid Blyton kind of famous five almost figures. They're, meant to be holier than thou. So it was a massive scandal at the time, and he lost his job.
For American listeners, they're equivalent to how the actresses who played Disney princesses used to be treated.
Entirely so. And it was just Richard Bacon commenting on the headline, Gove regrets cocaine after 20 years. And his comment was just, gosh, I usually felt regret after 5 to 6 hours after taking the stuff. He must have taken loads. So that's been the most amusing story of the Tory leadership election. The other one I want to focus on is Boris making his big pitch. I think I said last time when we quickly went over the candidates that I thought Boris was going to be the clear frontrunner amongst the public, but he might not be from within the party. Oddly, the party seems to be supporting him quite a bit, or at least the ERG faction. I know that Jacob Rees-Mogg has already got behind him, and every day on Twitter I see a new MP sort of coming out saying, I back Boris. So if there's going to be a time for him to make the final two, this is it. So now the next question comes, how does Boris appeal to those 10,000 or so, or no, it's not 10,000, it is more than that, sorry, about 100,000 or so Conservative members who will be able to vote in the second stage of voting? Two big things have come out in the week. One is the headline you read, which was that 39 billion is ours. That suggests that Boris Johnson is going for a no-deal Brexit, so a quick Brexit, so he can try and get all those votes from the Brexit party. Also shows that he's going to be tough on the EU. He's going to, make sure they get the best from Brexit. He's not going to pay it, even if it, causes a bit of trouble. The Conservatives tend to like that fight, particularly the hard Brexiteers. That's hard Brexiteer language there. His second strand is the news that's broken today that he would support a tax cut for those earning over 80,000. That's quite a niche policy, and certainly not like a one nation Conservative policy that Theresa May would.
It's not a vote winner,
forward.
Is it? Like, it's not the proportion of the country who are earning over 80,000 is not a large percentage.
But that's the wrong question at this point in time. The right question is, what percentage of 100,000 Conservative members are earning over £80,000?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we try to be measured, I suppose, but for the Conservative Party members who will be voting on this, there is, if you go listen to one of the more recent episodes of the Blue Bugle, Mark Steele, who is a very strong Labour supporter and has written a lot in, I think, The Guardian and other left-leaning papers about this kind of thing. He went on a bit of a tirade against the kind of generic Conservative Party member voter, which... I'd go listen to that for, I think, maybe a summary of the kind of demographics you've got there. But I think it's a lot of the joke made was along the lines of essentially, it's rich landowners choosing the Prime Minister. It's like we're back in the 1700s.
Yes, boy is it. So that's the odd state of the Conservative leadership election. I think just to quickly summarise, of those 10 names that you read out, and let me just grab the photo again. So obviously we've got Gove, Hunt, Javid, Johnson, Leadsom, McVeigh, Rabb and Stewart as the front runners. I think Harper and Hancock are the ones that I'm not so sure on. I know Hancock, if he's backed by Damien Green, he'll be more of a Remainer side of the party. I think if I had to pick one to be the real... the one to give Boris the closest fight, it might be Saeed Javid at the moment. I only say that in the fact that he's got the backing of Ruth Davidson, the Scottish leader of the Conservative Party, who was once sort of touted as quite a popular figure within the party, certainly in the centre of the party, and seen as more of a moderate. I believe this will probably become a fight between the Brexiteers and the moderates, and then it'll be left up to the membership to decide which side of that party wins.
A few more policy points I think we wanted to bring up. So you mentioned... So firstly, Jeremy Hunt was previously the Health Secretary and very much disliked, I think is the nicest way to put his time as Health Secretary. As I've said before, Jeremy Hunt, one of the few men alive who is his own rhyming slang. He has a weird policy on abortion. I mean, it's not weird, I suppose, to some people. It's the kind of thing we tend to hear maybe from the US, where they've had various things going on about abortion. But over here in the UK, we tend to be fairly like, abortion is fine. It doesn't seem to be a big policy winner for anyone. So it's very strange that he's talking about lowering the abortion limit to 12 weeks. And I don't know if he thinks because he was head of the NHS for a bit, he gets to decide what women do with their bodies or something. But it's a very strange policy that seems very out of left field, even for the Conservatives.
It doesn't seem to tie in with any big vote winner that I can think between any big demographic, maybe between hard right conservatives, but if that's his pitch to get them on board, I feel they would value a hard Brexit policy rather than this hard social policy. I think maybe with 10 candidates in the field, it's a very crowded field, and you need to do something to make yourself stand out. And not everyone is Boris Johnson. The big benefit Boris Johnson has is that he automatically has the ear of the papers. He's got that kind of, what's the French for va-va-voom, Bobby? You know, like all of that. He's got that certain, what the French would call a certain I don't know what, about him, that instantly gets him the attention of the media. Everybody else has to fight for those scraps. So that's why you've got Gove saying mad things about doing cocaine. That's why you've got Rory Stewart saying he did opium. That's why you've got Hunt saying this abortion policy limit that, although it sounds mad, gets him a bit of headline space. These people are trying to vie for the attention of the members, and if they want to fight Boris, then they're going to have to be a bit different, or at least start differentiating themselves in some way, or they'll just be left by the wayside. I went through that list of 10. You know, I said about Hancock and the other one who I've already forgotten, which shows how poorly his time is going.
Mark Harper. It's very similar to Matt Hancock. It's very easy to get them confused, I think.
Yeah, they could be the same person and I wouldn't know. It's like... it's
two white men in blue ties running for the Conservative Party leadership. We can't tell them apart.
Exactly. So it's hard to... You don't want to become one of those also-ran people. So making a statement like that helps you get noticed. If it'll actually help you win the leadership election is an entirely different question. And I feel maybe the person who's doing the most earnest job of trying to put sensible policy decisions forward is probably Rory Stewart, the one who looks like an unfortunate Aardman creation.
I was going to say he looks a bit like a kind of mid-level professor, maybe an associate professor, someone who's like still trying to make it to the top spot. But, you know, looks constantly like he's running from one meeting to another. But I think he's probably, out of them, like, if I had to pick someone to have out of that list, he's probably the one I'd pick. But I think he is probably the most left-leaning of all of the candidates. I don't think, as we said last time, I don't think he's going to really stick it out in that field. We don't think Esther McVeigh is really going to get anywhere. Harper and Hancock, no one knows who they are. So that kind of whittles it down to 5 already. Dominic Raab is currently second in the running according to the bookies, which worries me slightly because he doesn't know that we're an island, or at least didn't until recently. I still kind of feel like we're probably going to get Boris versus Sajid at the end, but I don't know. I suppose it depends. Like, it depends whether the kind of image we have of a Conservative Party member will go for the kind of shrewd move of having Sajid there as a vote winner, because at a general election, I think he could do quite well. You know, self-made man, son of an immigrant, etc. All kind of builds into that. Well, he's doing Conservative policies and is in the Conservative Party, so hopefully we'll get most of the Conservative votes he normally would, but also could appeal slightly across the aisle. Even if you don't necessarily agree with him, it seems like he seems like a good choice for a leader. But yeah, I don't know if they will vote that way at all. I also don't really know what the party feels of Boris. This is the problem. Like, this is one of those things where we don't have contacts, you know, deep in the middle of Westminster. Well, I have one or two, but they're not Conservative Party members. They don't have that kind of feel for how the how things would go. And I wonder if, like, I think the thing with Boris is he seems to be a bit useless, and I think actually he is a bit useless. I don't think there's enough of an act there. And I wonder if people who see him all the time have seen through his kind of buffoonishness.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that civil servants seem to say about Boris, particularly as his time as Foreign Secretary, was this isn't an act, he's just bad. He appeared not to know, and it was that I think there were comments saying that it was embarrassing having to turn up to some meetings with somebody who clearly hadn't read the brief or clearly didn't know what they were saying. And there's a sort of a thick of it style documentary that followed Boris around whilst he was Foreign Secretary, and I would recommend people watch that because it's a fascinating insight into what the Prime Minister of our country could be. He has that certain je ne sais quoi about him. That's his big pull, but maybe faced with political reality, particularly the political reality we're facing today with Brexit, that it demands a very meticulous person to go through that. And fingers crossed, Boris will hand the task of Brexit off to somebody who's willing to do the reading, and Boris can just be the front man, because if Boris takes his own lead on it and becomes leader, then I worry slightly about where the country would be heading, but that's a long way off for now.
So all this talk about polls and party leadership and all of that, we always say the best poll is an election, and there was a by-election in Peterborough. So what does that tell us? Well, what does that tell us, essentially? How can we have a look at that? So I don't think we have a headline directly for this one, but there was a by-election in Peterborough. Let's discuss those results.
Yeah, so this was seen as the big test for the main two parties after the European election. This was one that the Brexit Party had been targeting quite a bit. There was a strong leave vote in Peterborough. The election was happening because the Labour leader because the former Labour MP had to step down due to criminal charges against them. So, yeah, it was a tough election for Labour to face in what is usually quite a tight Labour-Conservative marginal, and with Labour struggling and the Brexit Party taking so much of the Conservative vote, Nigel Farage really fancied his chances of winning. The eventual result was one... do you want to explain the eventual result, or just go through the figures there, Tom?
Labour won barely, with 31% of the vote. Brexit come in second on 29%. Conservative Party had 21%, Liberal Democrats on 12%, Green Party 3%, UKIP 1%, others 2% spread across 9 candidates. So I think we can essentially ignore others there. If you look at the vote change, the Conservative Party has lost 25% of its vote, nearly all of which has gone to the Brexit Party. And then Labour has lost 17% of its vote, which has been spread. Well, I mean, 4% of that must have gone to the Brexit Party, because all of the other parties or groups of parties have received more votes. So the percentage change there from Labour kind of split across a few more, which is, I suppose, tying into that story we've had since the 2017 general election, where when Labour lose votes, it does tend to get spread more, whereas with the Conservatives, they were losing votes previously to UKIP or to now the Brexit Party. Oh, and that's a Labour hold, obviously, if that wasn't clear.
No, that's entirely right, and the way that those vote percentages shown, even though there's a lot of things about by-elections which are slight caveats, we've got to remember that by-elections usually act as more of a protest vote than a normal general election. People see it as a chance to get their views across no matter what. That's why you had 15 candidates standing from everywhere. It's probably that end result is probably not a bad description of where the polls are at the moment, with Labour narrowly leading, the Brexit Party hot on their heels, Conservatives down in the doldrums until they can win back votes in the Brexit Party, and the Lib Dems on the rise. This will be one that could have been a lot worse for Labour. They'll have been glad to get it with a win on the board, but the threat of the Brexit Party and what they could do to British politics is now looming, and that's the big wake-up for everyone, particularly the Conservatives, who I think that swing suggests that they lost. A swing of minus 25% for the Conservatives and a growth of plus 29 for the Brexit Party suggests that the Conservatives lost heavily to the Brexit Party. The hold is... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's been pointed out in the chat, and we did have it in our notes, that this was a heavily Leave area with a 60% or nearly 61% voting for Leave. So it's going to really factor into the vote here.
Yeah, Brexit is always going to be an issue and will become even more so when you literally have a party named after it on the list. I think I read somewhere on Twitter that, worryingly, it was like only the Brexit Party's it was number 200 on a list of seats they targeted for an election, so for them to come so close will make them feel quite boisterous about what they could do in a first-past-the-post system. And I think in the last podcast I kind of dismissed what the Brexit Party could do in a first-past-the-post system. UKIP struggled back in 2015 even when they had quite a large share of the electorate, and they may have done even better if David Cameron hadn't promised a referendum on the European Union, which swayed quite a few people away from UKIP at the time. It's kind of like a scary time for the two parties. As I've said, it's a big wake-up call, and maybe we've talked a lot about how the Brexit Party is bad for the Conservatives, but I think this election also went a long way to highlight the failings that Labour have, particularly in these Leave areas, or at least between those who might traditionally vote Labour. That +9 for the Lib Dems, I suspect, is nearly all from Labour people switching their vote and wanting to back a more pro-Remain party. Now, as we've mentioned before, the vote here was Leave, 60%. Being a pro-Remain party is never probably going to get you a win in this seat, but it does serve as quite a large protest vote, and had the Brexit Party won, then I'm certain that there would be a lot of Labour Party supporters pointing the finger at the Lib Dems, saying it was you who let the Brexit Party in. You know, if you hadn't split the vote, then we would have been fine. But it's also a warning for the Labour Party that they've got to do better to hold Remain voters as well, or they're going to maybe lose out in these key Labour Conservative marginals. It also highlighted, unfortunately for Labour, the problem of anti-Semitism that's surrounded the party. The candidate who won had been involved in a minor anti-Semitism scandal where she'd liked some anti-Semitic Facebook posts, and her apology for it was practically non-existent. When asked directly about it, they sort of said that, oh, she's disavowed those posts and they were a long time ago. Not much else. So it seems bizarre that Labour would field a problematic candidate in Peterborough, particularly when it's trying to get rid of that image, but it appears that for some reason they are unable to find the candidates who aren't problematic at the moment. Finally, just talking about Labour and the Liberal Democrats again, there was one story that broke quite soon after we'd recorded the last episode, and that was of Alastair Campbell.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the former Labour spin doctor, I guess you'd call him, who had been dismissed from the Labour Party because he admitted on air that he'd voted for the Liberal Democrats in the European election. Voting for another party is against the Labour Party's code of conduct, and he sort of got a generic email to him saying, you said you did that, you're out. Alastair Campbell has reacted quite strongly to this, saying that, you know, he's Labour through and through. The reason he voted Lib Dem was to send a message to his party, which, you know, he thinks he did. He thinks Labour has now taken on a much more strong Remain stance in the wake of those European elections. So he achieved his aim, but if they're going to throw out everybody who voted Lib Dem, then there might be quite a few sort of former MPs or lots of people that he knew. He said he got lots of messages of support from people that said, hey, I'm Labour, but I voted Lib Dem as a protest in this last election as well. So there's a lot of people sort of holding their hands up and saying, you know, I'm Spartacus, so's my wife, you know, all of that jazz to try and save Alastair Campbell. The other thing that was highlighted was how quickly Alastair Campbell had been dismissed for what many thought was quite a minor discrepancy compared to the other sort of long-running anti-Semitism cases within the Labour Party that had not been dealt with or had been ended with a slap on the wrist, or the investigations were still going after years. I think the MP Jess Phillips wrote in her Twitter post that, you know, the Twitter user, the members of the Labour Party who had a death threat against her, that case was still ongoing after a year. Meanwhile, it took a couple of days for Alastair Campbell to be dismissed. The Labour Party has got to sort out its problems in its disciplinary channels and how it deals with this sort of dissent within the party. In short, it's a real mess for Labour, and whenever they think they can take the initiative, it's sort of taken away by a massive own goal, by stuff that shouldn't be happening for a major political party. They should have this stuff sorted out by now. You could say, in something that I've always said, and you know, is totally an original fact of my own, is that it's really dropped them into a Campbell soup. You can insert the laughter track there, if you could, or the applause, whichever. Thank you.
That's a round of applause.
Yes, it's this whole sort of Campbell soup mess, this quagmire of kind of just own goals that Labour keeps making. They should be making hay whilst the Conservative Party, implodes. Instead, they are barely ahead in the polls, struggling to get their voice out, and the Labour Party needs to buck its act up quickly before they have to deal with the next Conservative leader. They might find things really hard, or how they deal with the bounce, and there will be a bounce after the Tories elect a new leader. That's the big question. That's the next big test of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. How he deals with that will probably define how they go into the next general election.
Yeah, it's interesting, and people have been talking back and forth about this, but it is. I think it's worrying that the fact that, as you say, they've come down very quick and hard on this, and they've had these issues with anti-Semitism, especially when it seems to be levelled at people who are in maybe not necessarily in Corbyn's inner circle, but are seen as supporters of Corbyn. And I think there is this weird war going on inside the Labour Party between the new Labour group and the kind of old Corbyn group and the newer Corbyn group as well. And it's a bit strange how things are going about. And because it's all behind closed doors, we can only really guess from the outside. It's a bit like black box testing, where you just see the weird results from the outside and you don't really know what's going on inside.
It's a real mess for them. I think a quick point on that hard and fast rule is that it is a rule. I believe Owen Jones sort of put up a quick defence on the day of why Alastair Campbell got dismissed. Quite simply, he broke the rules. There is a rule that says that you broke the rules. That's why he got a generic email. That's why it was so quick, because it's such a clear violation of policy that you can go, oh, you admitted that on national TV. That is breaking the rules. You're out. However, it's one of those questions of, he broke the rules, yes, but is it a good political move to ban one of your sort of potential biggest advocates and a person who's probably a bigger problem for you outside the party than he is within? You want to keep people like Alastair Campbell on your side and still fighting for the Labour Party, because you know what damage he did to his enemies during the Blair years. He was a formidable spin doctor for a reason. He's the reason we have Peter Capaldi's angry Scottish character in the thick of it, because he's supposed to be Alastair Campbell, but fictionalised. So precisely. So you don't want Malcolm Tucker angry with you, as I'm sure you can attest. So yeah, an odd situation for Labour. Like I said before, they'll be happy with the win, but I think this result is ultimately indicative of the mess British politics is in, and how divided we are as a country. You see that Labour scraped by, but they scraped by with 31% of the vote, and quite a lot of people, you could argue that the majority against that, of the Conservatives, the Brexit Party, and the Lib Dems, maybe none of them would really be happy with the Labour candidate winning. If you've got just over 60% against you, even though you won in a first past the post system, still means that you are quite unpopular amongst the large majority of people as well. And that's the big problem with our politics at the moment. We can't come to a clear decision. There's no definite 50%. Yes, that's the clear majority say that. It's, a huge sort of jumble of ideas. I've put one, and you might want to put that clip in the chat, I would. If you haven't watched it, give it a watch. It's a great 2 minutes of somebody going off on a rant on a British politics show, essentially saying that we've failed to deal with the political reality for the past 2 years. We had a vote that was sort of based on fantasy and conjecture, and neither side, neither Remain nor Leave, really knew what it meant to leave the EU. We've had 2 years to sort of wrestle with that fact and found out that it's very, very difficult. And now we found that we can't. The argument sort of moved again to the political fantasy. The Brexit Party is reliving the battle of 2016. They want to have that vote again because they were able to win it, and those arguments were effective. And we can see that they are certainly being effective in European and maybe in first past the post elections. The problem comes when you are so disengaged from political reality, and that we delve into this political fantasy, that when we have to hit reality again, we'll hit really hard. We are going to have to leave the European Union in some way, and we're going to have to do it in an orderly or disorderly fashion. We need to sort our stuff out by October the 31st. And at the moment, I can't see how we're going to do this. But maybe the one bit of reassurance I can give you is nobody can. We won't know until we've got a new Conservative leader. It all depends on that new leader, the approach they decide to take, and then I'll be able to give you a much more considered suggestion about how the future may be.
So I suppose, kind of ending a little on a downer there again.
I always like to end on a downer. I never like to give us hope. It's the hope that kills you.
but hope is the thing with feathers. But yes, maybe we should just cover one of the Tory candidates in feathers. That might be good. Might make us all happy. It's kind of, I suppose, one thing just to kind of end this discussion, which has been essentially kind of linked stories. I mean, because everything is kind of linked via the current political state. But so Brexit's been pushed back, and now the Tory party are having a bit of infighting. Everyone's a bit confused, dazed and confused post European elections and also that by-election. Are you concerned? I mean, because I am, that we're not really going anywhere with this whole Brexit malarkey right now, and we're just going to end up in a similar position in October to the one we had in March.
Yeah. I think it's been a point repeated by Rory Stewart, who, like I say, I consider one of the more sensible candidates, that the deal we have with the European Union is non-negotiable. We've don't waste this time, the EU told us, and we have totally wasted it. I don't think any Tory is those Tories that are saying that we can renegotiate the deal are wrong. The EU has said this is the deal, you just need to find a way to pass it through Parliament. And none of that work is going on. Theresa May did try with the cross-party talks, but that ultimately led to her having to leave and step down as Tory party leader. The next Tory leader needs to make sure they don't waste this time, or that they'll do that, or they'll just deliberately run down the clock, which is the easiest solution for a potential prime minister, but not necessarily the best. Not the best in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's a bit worried. It would be my summary of the people I've spoken to. And it's like, this feels very much like the calm before the storm. And we've already had the storm once, and I don't want us to keep repeating this.
Yeah.
I mean, people have made jokes about, the year is 3000 and something. Theresa May is God Emperor of mankind, still presenting her withdrawal bill. And I feel there's going to be these problems. If we just keep ignoring it, we're just going to keep butting up against it. And our politics is just going to be Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. And maybe we should move on to doing something else that's a bit more important. I'm not saying Brexit isn't important to deal with, because now that it's like Pandora's box, now it's open, we have to deal with it in some way. But there's other policies that need to be thought about, and not only thought about, but fought over, in elections. We can't just be doing Brexit back and forth until we die, until we just have a Brexit party and a non-Brexit party. So, yeah. I suppose, despite my best attempt, we've kind of ended on a downer anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Sorry. Terribly sorry. It's very British of us.
Yeah.
If you love this kind of incisive political discussion, please come and join us at parliamentary.observer, our website where you can come and comment on our episodes. You can also find us on Reddit at Unparliamentary Language. You can find us as Unparliamentary Language on Facebook. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Unparl Podcast. And of course, if you feel so inclined, you can join us on patreon.com/TTSS, where you can donate to all of our shows at once. At the moment, we're working out what kind of perks we should offer. Obviously, you get the feeling of having helped your creators you like, but also we get to give but also we've been doing things like taking the headlines and putting them in as kind of special bonus content. I'm going to record a little thing at the end of this episode from one of our listeners as bonus content. So if you're listening live, or if you're a patron, you will get to hear that. So yeah, come along and join us on Patreon as well. And of course, if you don't have money to spare, you can rate us and subscribe on every service imaginable. 5-star ratings do help. They move us up the chart positions. And we see that, we get to read those reviews, and that's really lovely as well. So, if you like our show, support us in any way you can. That's great. And we'll just keep on wittering here, but it's always nice to feel loved. So I believe it's good night from me.
And it's a good night from him.
Bye.
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 Have some hope. Have a bit of hope from me. Bye.
This is great radio, this. me just clipping things out. So, yeah.
We might have to bleep that out. I don't mind. Or bleep, or if I have to re-record it. But yeah.
We'll keep that in with a bleep. It'll be fine.